This episode contains discussions about eating disorders, mental health challenges, and recovery. Please listen with care and reach out for support if needed. Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl Podcast, a 3-time award-winning show that aims to motivate and inspire you while increasing the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. If you're passionate about adventure, challenge, and learning from women who have overcome obstacles and achieved remarkable things, then this is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday at 7 a.m, new episodes go live featuring incredible women who share their stories, insights, and tips to help you achieve your dreams and goals. You can support the Tough Girl mission by signing up as a patron. Visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. Keep listening until the very end as I share more information about what's going on with me with Tough Girl Challenges, give shout outs, and recommend other Tough Girl Podcast episodes. More information can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com.
My name's Caitlin Massone. I'm currently based in Medford, New Jersey, which is on the east coast of the United States. In my kind of daily 9-to-5 life, I'm a practicing neurologist, and I work in a hospital system in New Jersey. I have a pretty interesting schedule in that I work 7 days at a time, and then I'm off for 7 days at a time. So since I've been doing that for a few years, it's actually allowed me to develop a few new interests, which have included ultra running, hiking, backpacking, and mountaineering. And then I also just wrote my first book, which is called Running from Perfection. And this book is essentially a memoir about my life and my journey through a long-term eating disorder and how I found endurance sports and harnessed the power of nature and sports in my recovery.
So explain to me, what does a neurologist do?
Sure. So a neurologist is, I like to just call it brain doctor to a layperson. But essentially what I do is I treat patients with different neurologic conditions, which could include disorders of the brain, the spinal cord, and the nervous system. And as I mentioned, I work in a hospital. So I'm essentially doing consulting work, seeing patients in the hospital during the daytime.
And you're 7 days on. Is that like the full 7 days? Or are you like a 9-to-5 for 7 days?
Oh, no, it's great. So it's usually 8 to 10 hour shifts per day. And then I do answer some phone calls overnight. And I'm basically available during the time that I'm working. But the flip side of that is I am not expected to be available at all when I'm not working. And so the 7 days that I'm off, I really take advantage of those again in terms of like sports and travel and other interests.
Is that like a normal setup, or have you sort of created that to fit into your life?
Just to kind of back up in terms of my training. So I did medical school and then 4 years of residency and a year of fellowship training to subspecialize. And at the time that I graduated fellowship in 2016, this actual concept of working 7 days off and 7 days on was becoming more popular. So I kind of jumped on the bandwagon at the time, and I've just been really fortunate to maintain that schedule since then.
No, I think I've just never heard of a schedule like that for a doctor, but obviously I'm basing that on like Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah, it's not quite as dramatic as that, but it is, it's a great schedule, so I can't complain.
Thank you for sharing all of that. That's really, sets the scene. But I'm always really fascinated as well as just learning more about, sort of where it all started for you, like your childhood. I mean, you must have been super smart. Were you sporty and outdoorsy from a young age? Were you into running and spending time outdoors? Was that your jam as well?
I would say yes. So I grew up in a very small town in New Jersey called Blairstown, and my childhood home was actually about a mile away from this place called the Mohican Outdoor Center, and you could actually get directly onto the Appalachian Trail from there, which, Sarah, I know you've actually thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail. So when we were growing up, my siblings and my friends and I, we would really spend a lot of days either walking or biking or jogging over to the Appalachian Trail and hiking a short segment of that. And when we weren't hiking, we also had access to this outdoor center where we could take out canoes for free for the day or pitch a tent and sleep under the stars. So we had this very romanticized version of nature when we were kids. And then in terms of like more formal sports, my love was always soccer. So I started, or I guess you would call it football, but I started playing soccer around the age of 5. And I really excelled at it. And I played on the varsity girls soccer team at my high school up until the time that I graduated. I would also just say that at that point in my life, that's kind of when the eating disorder started taking place when I was around 16. So unfortunately, I kind of lost that love of sport and nature for a pretty long period of time. And I really didn't come back to it until my late 20s and early 30s.
I suppose looking back now and also, writing your book, taking that time out to really reflect about the journey that you've been on. And, it's called Running from Perfection, My Journey from Eating Disorders to Endurance Sports and the Neuroscience Behind It. Are you able to, and I don't even know if this is possible to pinpoint, like, was there a moment or was there, and not even the word trigger, but did something happen that you were able to say that's when it started, or was it more gradual than that?
No, I think it was kind of a single moment, if I can pinpoint it. One of the things that I talk about in my book, again, it is mostly a memoir, but I kind of weave in chapters about neuroscience and how eating disorders happen and what's going on in your brain. So one of the first things I looked at was just how nature and nurture play a role in the formation of eating disorders. So there are definitely some people who are more prone to develop eating disorders through genetic and environmental factors. So there's definitely probably some factors that made me more prone to it. But I'd say if I had to pinpoint a single moment, when I was 16, my dad actually left our family and he not only moved far away, but he financially abandoned my mom and my siblings and I. And I think that acute stress at that time in my life, when your brain is vulnerable to these types of things, was kind of a tipping point for me. So that's when I kind of started the path down into anorexia.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Because I know your first title of your chapter 1, is called Little Miss Perfect. And
Right.
I suppose I'm just thinking pressure because,
Hmm.
you must have been doing very well at school, playing soccer and being on the varsity high school soccer team. Oh, and I hate it. Oh, like that Little Miss Perfect. Like it seems so derogatory, doesn't it? Like, oh,
Yeah.
Little Miss Perfect. And it's like, just because you're academic and sporty
Right.
and
There was definitely a lot of pressure around that. And, in some ways when I was a kid and an adolescent, like I liked being a perfectionist. I liked doing well at school and sports and getting straight A's and all of that was great until, that kind of type A personality or some of those personality traits kind of turned against me, when I started dieting and pursuing this, again, this path into anorexia and control over what I ate.
yeah. What would you say? I mean, there's probably like lots of, assumptions that people make about eating disorders, whether it's about, there probably is like more understanding that it is like a mental health illness or it's about, it's control. But what don't people know about them?
One misconception, and this is probably good for, women listening to the podcast to hear, is that a lot of people think that eating disorders are in some way that you're trying to control your weight or what you eat so that you are desirable, or attractive. And I think that's not true at all. Having been in that situation, especially with anorexia, it's more about having a sense of control over your life. And sometimes that just unfortunately comes out as, managing your eating or restricting your eating. But yeah, I think that's a common misconception that people think it's to be more attractive to the opposite sex or in some way, to, make yourself more aesthetic.
During your college years, when you're studying and dealing with this, and I'm assuming it's stressful, like going to medical school and the amount of study and work and exams that you've got to do. Were you still exercising at this point? Were you managing to go hiking, to play soccer? What were the other areas of your life looking like?
I would say it was super stressful. So during like college and medical school, at some point my anorexia became more binge eating and bulimia. And I think when I started binge eating, it was kind of impetus for me to exercise as well. I felt in some way that I needed to kind of balance out what I was doing with my body and overeating. But my exercise was not all that interesting. I would go to the gym and kind of mechanically check off, 3-mile runs or 5-mile runs and turn the treadmill off as soon as I was done. And I think at that time in my life, I was really just using exercise as like a balance for poor nutrition, and also just as like mentally just to check off the fact that I was doing something healthy for myself. And it really wasn't until I recovered from my eating disorder that I got back into soccer, and I got more into hiking, backpacking, and then into ultra running and mountaineering. So all of that was later in my early 30s.
So I'd love to talk more about the recovery from the eating disorder. What did your journey look like?
So my recovery is actually pretty beautiful. So what happened was I graduated from my fellowship in 2016, and I took a job in Colorado. And Colorado was vastly different than what I was used to in terms of living on the East Coast. I had been living in Philadelphia for 5 years in this, urban setting. And then all of a sudden I was exposed to really nature at its best. It was just endless vistas and green spaces, and it was kind of a playground, So when I got to Colorado, I kind of put my foot in the ground and said, at this point, I need to get over this eating disorder. I need to stop binge eating and being bulimic. And this is the perfect place to do that, and I really did just at that point in my life have the resolve to say, okay, we're going to move on to the next phase of life. So when I lived in Colorado, I essentially just quit cold turkey and I never binge ate again. And whenever I had the urge to binge eat or do something that would negatively impact my body, I kind of flipped that and I would go outside and I would start doing, short hikes or runs outdoors. And then eventually those things again kind of grew into longer runs and hikes to summits. And I actually got to the top of my first 14er, which is a 14,000 foot peak, halfway into my year of living in Colorado. So it was a really great experience for me.
Were you receiving much support at this point? Were you able to reach out and get support from other people or from other organizations? Or was this just you driving it?
It was me, I would say. When I was in my 20s, in the throes of anorexia and bulimia, I did seek professional help a couple of times. I did short stints of like group cognitive behavioral therapy, and I worked with a therapist, but it never really stuck for me. And I did keep my eating behaviors very private. So when I moved to Colorado, I was actually dating somebody at the time who's now my husband, for almost 7 years. And I essentially just shared my secret with him and, moved to Colorado and started this new life. And he was really my support during that period of time. I will say, like, since my recovery, I am obviously much more willing to share my story. I can now write about it, talk openly about it, answer questions. So it's been a long way from keeping it a secret to, publicly, speaking about it.
And thank you so much for talking about it, because I know that there will be other women out there who are going through this at the moment or have gone through this. I suppose my next question, and I hope I'm going to ask it in a sensitive way, which is along the lines of, with the anorexia and the bulimia, obviously there's habits that you have formed in relation to that. And then there's that element of controlling what's going into your body. And then the habits, which can almost be labeled, and I don't necessarily like bad or good habits, but then you can have habits like with running and with ultra running and climbing mountains. It's achievement based. Exercise is related in a way to food because of the fueling that you need to give your body, and then almost that balance between food and exercise, and transitioning the control from the food to the running and the exercise. Was that something that you were concerned about or worried about in any way?
You know what? I wasn't in the moment. And that's actually great that you brought that up, because 2 of the chapters in my book that are science-based are actually about habit formation in the brain, and then also the role that exercise plays, both in terms of sometimes helping you recover from eating disorders or even sometimes causing them. And that chapter is actually called Exercise Junkie. So I really didn't think about this until I was writing the book. And I started to wonder if in some way like exercise was actually like a cross addiction, or a replacement for a bad habit, replacing it with something better. And I think the jury's still out on that. I definitely, exercise is a good habit for me. And with that, I have kind of, again, turned my nutrition into something positive as well. But I I don't get as preoccupied with the food itself or the nutrition as I did when I had the eating disorder, because I really do look at it as just a way to nourish my body and to get me through like endurance events. So I think I just have a better outlook on it now. And I kind of look at it a different way.
With like, I suppose like the mental side, like what are some of the thoughts that you have between, say, like the good thoughts and the negative thoughts, or the thoughts that relate to food, or the thoughts that relate to exercises? Like, how could you try and explain the mental battle? If it's not, it might not, even the battle might not be the right word, but the mental um juggling that's maybe going on inside your head.
I would say for me at this point, probably no. But just to kind of touch on like I guess that inner voice and kind of negative or positive self-talk. I think with eating disorders, when you form habits in your brain, sometimes the voices telling you to do certain things are urges coming from like primitive parts of your brain. And I don't want to get too into the neuroscience of it, but that's essentially what happens with habit formation and addiction. So there are other parts of your brain, especially the frontal lobes of your brain, that are kind of the voice of reason, that tell you, to make decisions or restrain from doing something or push to do something further. In terms of a battle, I would say there are parts of your brain that kind of battle in that discussion. And when you become an endurance athlete or you're into sport, I think you can kind of harness the power of that voice of reason. And you can use that to kind of talk over some of those primitive urges or negative thoughts. So for me, especially with anorexia and bulimia, there's a lot of negative self-talk. Oh, you're too fat. You're not thin enough. You're not good enough, right? And I think when you're out running or mountaineering or climbing, you really don't have any room for that voice of negativity. So for me, it's always just keeping it positive and telling myself, that you are a good runner. You can do this. I have a small mantra, which is just a couple of words where I say powerful and perseverance in my head. And those are just kind of the things that I use to get me through. So just to, recap again, I think there is a battle going on within your brain in terms of these different voices that you're listening to, but you can choose to have the positive voice kind of win out.
Yeah. So let's talk more about your running journey. Did you always have a dream that you wanted to run a marathon? Was that something was maybe on like your tick box list, or was that something, or someone who inspired you that you wanted to have this as a goal and eventually, an ultra marathon, progressing your distances? How did your running journey evolve?
Sure. And I will say it was never a goal. In fact, I ran my first half marathon when I was in medical school, and I trained hard for that. And I said to myself, I'm never going to run a marathon. That's for crazy people. Why would you do that to your body? So my running journey was slow and gradual, and I eventually built up to that distance. So my first marathon was actually in the year that I lived in Colorado. Again, I was surrounded by just beautiful landscapes, and also the people there were just constantly doing these amazing feats. They would run marathons up mountains and back. And if you wanted to socialize, you wouldn't meet a friend at the bar for the drink. You'd go out for a run on a trail. So I think I just kind of learned secondhand to just try greater distances and try to push my body a little bit. And so that's where I did my first marathon, and I loved it, and from there, my outlook was kind of like, well, I did this once, I can do it again. And I think your body over time just gets more accustomed to what you're putting it through, and suddenly running 8 miles or 10 miles or 12 miles isn't as hard as the first time you did it. And it is actually, you can build both mental and physical resilience like the further you go. So, I started running ultra marathons in 2020, right before the COVID pandemic started. I ran my first 50-kilometer race in California. And again, it was kind of, that thought I had when I ran a half marathon, which was like, oh, I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to do this again. And then once I had completed it, there was such a sense of like pride and accomplishment in running that distance that, again, I did more 50Ks and then eventually worked my way up to 50 miles.
So when you're out running, do you have like a race strategy, especially like the first time you did an ultra, the first time you went past the marathon distance, you're running into that unknown. When you take those extra steps, it's like your body's never been here before, your mind's never been here
Mhm.
before. What was going on then mentally?
Yeah. So I had no race strategy the first time I ran an ultra. And in fact, I had only been running on pavement mostly before I hit the trails to do that race. So it was definitely, a kick to my butt. But my strategy now, is I've learned, like I said, to get used to just time on my feet and being out there. And I think my strategy is to kind of break it up into small chunks of time to make it feel more manageable. So my thing is usually I'll space out my nutrition to make sure that I'm eating, on the hour every hour. And then I'll also turn my music on and off for an hour at a time, just to kind of like keep your brain engaged and have you look forward to something, whether that's, a package of honey stingers gels or listening to your favorite music. Just knowing that, if you keep going, that's also kind of the next little reward that you get along the way is nice for me.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about your fueling then, and your I suppose, like, your new attitude towards how you fuel for endurance events. What does that look like? What are your go-to snacks? Like, how do you make sure that you maintain your energy levels?
Sure. So I've been working with a running coach for the past 2 years. So she's kind of given me some tips on nutrition. I keep it easy, meaning that I don't overtax myself thinking about what I'm going to bring. I kind of just think in the day before, like, what sounds good. Let me put that into my running vest. So my main go-to right now would be like GU energy gels, honey stingers, sometimes the little waffles, and then sometimes I'll actually pack Pop-Tarts, which was kind of like a favorite childhood snack, and just kind of, something nice and sugary to have along the way. I will say, since I did have, the issue with the eating disorders, I don't get overly critical about like, the number of calories or the necessarily breakdown, but I do try to get like 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates, every time I'm taking a snack. So again, it's kind of like thinking about it, but not overthinking it.
And nature, like you sort of talked about sort of nature and spending time in nature and just like the healing powers. And especially, when you talk about Colorado, you can definitely hear this, like your voice sort of like elevating. I suppose it's just from like happy memories and,
Yeah.
spending time in that nature. I'd love you just to share more about, is there, I know that, like, I know, but like, 'cause, like, I know, but from, I suppose, the medical and, because there is evidence about spending time in the outdoors and actually how it can change your brain. And like,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but like, do you know about that?
Yeah, for sure. And again, every time you are bringing up one of these topics, it is something I've written about in the book as well. So the last kind of science-based chapter that I wrote in my book is about the effects of nature and exercising in nature on your mental health. And so I think, it's pretty interesting. Some of the data on how like nature impacts your health goes back a few decades. And if you've heard of like forest bathing or immersing yourself in natural landscapes and even not doing any exercise, there's benefit. So, those like initial studies that they did, showed that not only was there positive effects on things like your blood pressure, your stress hormones like cortisol, but there's also effect on mood in that being in nature, produces more happiness and decreases your anxiety level and even decreases depression. So I think that in and of itself is really interesting. And there are imaging studies and things that including MRI studies and what's called electroencephalography or EEG, which looks at your brain waves. And there have been studies that have shown that being in nature increases your alpha brain waves, which actually is indicating that you're in a relaxed state. So I think that's pretty cool. There's also, again, things that I've looked at, just the effects of exercise on top of being in nature. And it really seems like it's just this additive effect because when you're in a natural environment and you're kind of distracted from negative emotions and sensation of pain, and meanwhile, your brain's kind of churning out all of these hormones and chemicals that are boosting your mood. We actually perceive exercise to be easier when we're outside, and that makes us more likely to do it again and for longer.
I love it when people talk about like it's like a bad thing, like to hug a tree, and it's like, no, go and give a tree a hug, grounding as
Absolutely.
well. Take your shoes and socks off, go and
Right.
mush your feet into the earth. And I think
Yep.
one of the things that I sort of noticed, especially when I was out in New Zealand, when I was like up in the mountains, and it's like the feeling of awe, like you just be looking around and like you just be breathing in this like just I suppose this clean, fresh, like amazing air, and you just feel as though you're getting this incredible amount of oxygen in the brain, and it does, obviously not. I'm not science backed, but just like it feels really really good to me. But I know that you're spending more time in the mountains. Would you like to share more about how you're mountaineering and how you're, yeah, like spending time in the mountains has obviously sort of like ramped up a little bit more for you? What's that journey been?
Oh, definitely. So, like I mentioned, when I lived in Colorado, I was doing a lot of hiking. And when I moved back to New Jersey, which I did that to be with my husband, again, I moved to a very flat area. I live in the Pine Barrens where there are flat walking trails and things like that, but really not a lot of, opportunity for altitude or strenuous hikes. So I kind of took an interest in mountaineering a couple years ago after watching a documentary called 14 Peaks, which you've probably heard of. And that was a documentary by Nims Purja about his team of Nepalese climbers and how they summited all of the 8,000-meter peaks, in record time. And I was just so captivated by that. I looked at the mountains that they were climbing and they even made the Rocky Mountains look like little molehills. And I thought, wow, this is fascinating. And one of the things that they constantly talk about with mountaineering is that, two of the attributes that you need to be a good mountaineer are big lungs and strong legs. And as a runner, I thought, well, that's what I have, so why couldn't I try this? So my first mountaineering climb was in 2022. I went with International Mountain Guides, which again, as you can tell from the name, has international climbing trips, but they do a lot based in the Pacific Northwest in the United States. And so I went on a 3-day all women's climbing trip on Mount Baker, which is one of the glaciated volcanoes out in Washington. And I just fell in love with it. I loved the exertion of climbing the mountain, the fact that it was kind of a sister sport to endurance running and that you just constantly need to be kind of slowly chugging up this mountain. And I loved being out and camping in nature. So after climbing Mount Baker, I've since done a few other climbing trips in the U.S., including Mount Rainier, which I summited in 2023. And then I've also been on Mount Whitney, which unfortunately I didn't quite make it to the summit of that one due to a snowstorm. And just this past summer, I was on Mount Shuckson, which is another peak in the North Cascade mountain range. So I've fallen in love with it. It's, hard to sometimes get the time away from life to kind of get on these climbing trips, but I try to do it 2 to 3 times a year. And then the goal, being to eventually increase the height or the summit or, other aspects of the climbing and kind of evolve as a kind of novice mountaineer.
How was that winter expedition on Mount Whitney in California?
Oh, it was crazy. It was beautiful. I had not been to the Sierras in a very long time. And the approach to Mount Whitney, I guess, is more of a hiking trail in the summer, but in the winter, it's full on snowshoeing and post holing and cramponing. So I was out with a group of, I think, 7 other men, and we made it halfway up the mountain and got to camp and kind of do all of the activities that I love while mountaineering. But on our next day, unfortunately, a snowstorm rolled in. And so while we were trying to ascend to the next camp, we kind of made the group decision to turn back. But I did truly love that mountain, and I'd love to get back there. One of the fun things was after the trip was kind of cut short, we did get to do some outdoor rock climbing, which I had never done before. So I got a couple, like an added sport in on that trip, which was really fun.
And what's the next mountain that you're training for at the moment?
I'm going to do a Denali prep seminar on Mount Rainier in April. And then in August, I'm going to be doing another climb on Mount Rainier, just a different approach to the summit called the Emmons Glacier. So that one's a little just longer and more arduous and involves a little bit more, camping time. But that's kind of the next thing on my list.
Can I just check, is Denali the correct name or has its name changed? I'm not I can't, or is there a bit of back and forth?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, I guess with the current president is now changing it back to Mount McKinley. So I think that's sparked a little bit of controversy between mountaineers and politicians because I think for the past 8 or 9 years or so, it's been Denali.
And Denali's the native name, isn't it?
Correct. It is.
Right.
Yeah.
Got
Yep.
you. Okay. And so
Yeah.
with Denali, like who are you going on with that trip? Is
Mhm.
that with like another organization, like an all-women team are you doing it with, or is it just sort of, like a group of people who are just like really into their mountaineering?
So I'm going to go with International Mountain Guides again. I really like their organization and I've enjoyed, multiple climbs with them. The group will probably be like a mixed group of people that I don't know, but I do have one girlfriend from Colorado named Danielle who's actually going to be doing the trip with me. So I'm really excited to have her along. And I prefer the organized expeditions because in terms of wilderness survival, that's not really a strong suit of mine. And I really do like going with people who know what they're doing and know how to properly guide. So that's why I kind of stick with them.
And just with putting back on your doctor's hat and linking that into mountaineering, is there anything that you've learned which you've thought, oh, this is really interesting climbing mountains with like your doctor's knowledge?
hmm Yeah, I would say from the perspective of being like a female mountaineer, one of the things that I've read more about and taken an interest in is like the use of like hormone therapy and estrogen containing like oral contraceptive pills. There is a risk, especially with women, and as we hit past the age of 35, there's a risk that you could have be prothrombotic or more prone to clots when you're taking medications like that. And there are other risk factors that play into that. Women who also have migraines actually are at slightly higher risk of that as well. So I've actually stopped taking oral contraceptive pills to avoid any risks of like strokes, blood clots, pulmonary embolus, and things like that, because the risk of that does go up with the increase in altitude as well.
That's so interesting. And how long is the full deny? Is that a couple of week trip? Is that like a 3 week trip?
Yeah, I think it's usually 3 to 4 weeks and it's really dependent on weather. Most of the expeditions they do are in May and June, and they do try to avoid bad winter weather and being snowed in, but it's completely unpredictable. But yeah, I'm planning to do it probably in June of next year.
So when you are out sort of in the mountains doing your ultra endurance challenges, what for you is the biggest part of the challenge? Like, have you ever reached a point where you feel as though like you've reached your limit, or are you still sort of working on that? Is it the physicality of it? Is it the mindset? Is it the other people part of the team? What's sort of the most challenging aspect for you?
Yeah, I would say with ultra running, I think it's definitely the mental game. Like I said before, a lot of these things require building mental resilience and then your physical resilience kind of follows suit. So for me, it's been the challenge of kind of feeling like you're at the end of your rope and feeling like, okay, now's the time when I want to quit, right? And your brain tells you should quit and your body tells you should quit. And I think for me, it's that kind of moment where I have to tell myself, well, no, you're tired and sure, you'd rather be in a hot shower or on a cozy, comfy couch right now, but you can do this and you can push through. So I think my biggest challenge is usually mental, but it's also like the biggest reward is to get through that moment and then tell yourself like you could do that. You could accomplish that. You were really just putting a kind of a checkpoint on yourself that you didn't need to.
And I loved when you shared earlier about the mantras that you use, powerful and perseverance. Was that what you say to yourself over and over again?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'll do it with each step, just to kind of get a rhythm. One of the other kind of cool things that I did for myself was after my recovery from the eating disorder, I have this tattoo on my left calf, which is the eating disorder survival symbol. So sometimes when I'm running or my legs are caked with mud during the middle of a race, I can look down at that and like draw strength from that. So it's kind of those little things that I use to keep me going.
Oh, could you share more about? I've never heard of the symbol. What does the symbol look like?
Yeah, so it's a little tricky to describe, but it's kind of like these two arcs that almost look like they're embracing, and they're designed to look more like a female figure in terms of like curvature. But this also almost, looks like an embrace. It's very interesting. And I have a couple of flowers and leaves on mine just to kind of embellish it and bring in that nature aspect.
When did you get your tattoo done?
I had that done 2 years ago. That's my third tattoo, so I have a few at this point. But I did the wise thing and waited until I was in my 30s to get any permanent ink on my body. And thankfully I have no regrets about them. I love all of them.
How was that experience? Was that quite emotional, or was it almost like I'm I was like, I'm ready for this? Like I don't know, it was just like it came at the right time, or was this something that you'd almost like been working towards? Like you knew that you know what, I'm gonna get that tattoo at some point.
It kind of dawned on me just a couple of years that they would be a good motivational thing during, while I was running. And yeah, I think, the tattoo, the book, even talking to you, like every time that I talk about that eating disorder, it's very cathartic for me. Like it's almost like you're just letting a deep breath in and out, and just feeling that relief of like being unburdened from it. So again, I have, the emotional scars from that, but I have the ink on my skin that tells me like, hey, you got through this, and you can survive anything. If you can survive that, you can survive a 50-kilometer race.
Caitlin, where are you active on social media or not really?
Not too much. I'm active on Facebook and certainly involved in a few communities, including Women in Mountaineering, which is actually headed by Sunny Stroher, who was on your podcast before. But yeah, I find a lot of social media to be a little bit anxiety producing, so I try to keep it to a minimum.
And I love that because it's, you choose if like social media is giving you, anxiety, don't go on it like that. You're allowed to make that decision. I think it's harder. I think sometimes when you're like business building or such, or it must be also quite difficult, when you're trying to, promote and share more and more about your book. But then this is why you can come on podcast. I can help promote and share your book. But your book goes live on what's the date?
April 26th.
April 26th. Amazing. So I'll make sure that I share the links to your book so that people can go and find it. It's called Running from Perfection, My Journey from Eating Disorders to Endurance Sport and the Neuroscience Behind It. But Caitlin, I'd love for you to have final words of advice, final words of wisdom, and might be sort of be in two parts. If there's somebody listening at the moment who's just thinking, actually, do you know what? I need some help here. I need to sort this out with regards to their eating disorder. And I know that that's a massive question, and
Mm-hmm.
I would love to know, what would have you liked to have heard? What would have been the trigger to start you on the journey to help you recover from your eating disorder that you want other people, other women to hear?
Maybe just to have somebody nearby that says like, hey, I'm here to listen, or for even just for you to approach somebody and say, hey, I need to talk about this. I think a lot of, my regrets going through that was that I really didn't open up to anybody for, over a decade of my time, during which I struggled with that by myself. And I never realized that there were people around me that cared, but they didn't know how to ask questions, so whether that's engaging with a parent, a coach, a mentor, a teacher, a friend, your significant other, like there are people who are going to listen to you. And sometimes just by talking about it or starting that conversation can unburden you from a lot of like the shame and the negative feelings that come with that.
Thank you. Yeah, reach out, talk about it. There are people there. There are people who love you and care for you and want to help you and support you, like 1,000%. Caitlin, thank you so much for talking more about your journey and your story, and the lessons that you've learned and how you've linked it into the neuroscience behind it. Honestly, it's absolutely fascinating. And thank you for sharing more about your running journey and your mountaineering journey. And best of luck with Denali. Best of luck with all of that training. Thank you for being so open and honest. It's been so inspiring to speak to you.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's been an honor to be a guest, and I will continue to listen to your podcast as I have been for many years.
Hey, tribe, how you're doing? I hope you're all keeping super well. We are in April 2025, and this month we are going to be focusing on tribe members. So the end of every episode, I'm going to be giving shout outs to members of the Tough Girl tribe and just update you on what's been happening and what's been going on. So if you're a member of the Tough Girl tribe, then listen, because your update could be mentioned at the end of one of the April episodes. For those of you who are brand new to the Tough Girl podcast, you might be thinking, what is the Tough Girl tribe? The Tough Girl tribe is a closed Facebook community, and it's actually been closed to new members since January 2018, and it's only available to patrons and podcast guests. So Tough Girl Challenges is for women and girls, and its mission is to increase the amount of female role models in the media. The tribe, the community, the Facebook group, it's all about supporting, motivating, and encouraging each other, whether that's to do with personal goals, life goals, training for an event, or wanting to find people to train with, explore with, or even just for you to know people have your back and want you to succeed. So for me, it's about offering support in an online space. And I think initially when I started the Facebook community, it was growing so rapidly. And as a Facebook community grows from, say, 50, 60 members, it changes vibes when it gets to 100, 150 members. It changes again when it gets up to 300 members, when it gets to 500, 1,000 plus sort of members. You sort of start to lose maybe that sort of personal relationship that I think was initially built at the start. And this is going back years and years ago. And I still remember I was thinking, what do I do? How do I keep it so that it's a community and that it's all sort of connected? So that's why I ended up closing it in 2018. I'm still really pleased that I have closed it and limited its growth. So the people who remember are the women who are patrons of the Tough Girl podcast. And you can sign up as a patron by visiting Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast. And it's for, I always invite if our guests are on social media and are on Facebook and want to be a part of the community, they always get invited. So yeah, shout outs in April. It's, I love doing this. Sometimes when I go traveling, I don't get to engage as much as I want to. And it's really nice just to hear, what people have been up to. Big shout out to Damiana Day, who is in New Zealand walking. She's done around 650 kilometers so far, just south of Auckland. Life is just one step at a time. And what I love, Damiana, is that you are taking little side trips off the trail to go and visit hidden waterfalls. Congratulations on your journey. Keep walking, keep taking it one day at a time. Very proud of you. Massive congratulations goes out to Kate Armstrong, who has just been named runner-up for the Bridport Memoir Award. And this is for a book that you wrote called Beyond the Mountain. And you share more about your mountaineering, both the highs and the lows. And I can't wait to read more about your book. Massive congratulations on being named runner-up. What an incredible achievement. Ladies, very proud of both of you. Thank you for sharing your achievements. And it's so great to be able to recognize what you're doing, the fact that you are following your passions, and you are sharing your journeys with other people so they can be inspired by you. Keep it up. Keep writing, keep walking. It's absolutely inspiring to see. New episodes of Tough Girl Podcast go live every Tuesday at 7 a.m. UK time, with bonus episodes going live on a Thursday. If you'd like to support the work that I do, you can visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast, and sign up as a patron. Thank you again for listening. And all that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%, get after it, go for it, believe in yourself, because I believe in you. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.